Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and I'm here today with another chapter from Protector of the Small First Test by Tamora Pierce, published by RandomHouse. We are going to pick up where we left off with Chapter 8, Winter. The next morning, Kel opened her eyes to discover it was not yet dawn. She moaned. Once, just once, it would have been nice to sleep through the bell to Gower's knock on her door. Even with a banked fire in her room, it was icy, a solid argument for staying abed until the last possible moment. She probably shouldn't do her morning exercises until tomorrow or the next day. Even with Duke Baird's treatment, she ached all over. Several somethings hopped on her chest, interrupting her thoughts. Kel looked down. 13 sparrows, the entire courtyard flock, stood on the coverlet. Crown hopped up and down the distance from Kel's navel to somewhere below her chin, where Kel lost sight of her. She closed her eyes, waiting for the gentle peck. Instead, the quick gait that circled her cheek stopped beside her ear. Peep! Kel sat up, startling the birds into flight. They perched on the headboard, chattering at her. Wonderful, she said, throwing off the covers. So much for a little extra sleep. Looking up, she saw one of the small shutters was open. No wonder the room was so cold. She hobbled stiffly to the window, mumbling, "How can a tiny bird produce such a loud noise?" She opened the bottom shutters. Outside, the pre-dawn world was white. Over a foot of snow had fallen in the courtyard. More continued to fall in a steady, business-like way. It muffled all the sound, making Kel feel as if she and the birds were wrapped in a thick down comforter. "I see why you came in," she said, turning to look at her guests. They had taken advantage of her departure to huddle in the warm hollow she had left in her mattress. Kel grinned and went to poke up the fire. Once she had it going, she lit a branch of candles and carried them into her dressing room. Overhead, the great bell called everyone into another day's work. With no hearth, the dressing room was icy. Kel danced on the bare stone flags, teeth chattering as she stripped off her nightgown. A colorful sight awaited her. Fading purple-yellow bruises spread out over her left side and mottled her legs. A bigger purple-red bruise was just surfacing on her belly. Kel whistled, impressed in spite of herself. She had to have been in one or two worse fights than this, although they slipped her mind at the moment. The marks vanished under her clothes as she drew on her undertunic and scarlet wool hose. By that point, she was shivering so badly that it was all she could do to feed the laces through the holes in the long garments. She was securing the hose to her undertunic when she heard a rap on her door. "Just a moment," she called, grabbing a robe. Wishing that the servants could simply enter her room, and knowing that the boys would destroy her things if she had the special locks removed, she ran to open the door. Gower took 2 steps past her and then turned to stare. "Sunrise come up early today, miss." Kel blinked at him. "What?" The man nodded to her face. "Looks like the sun's about to come up in your eye. Nice color, I think." "Nice color. Thank you, I think." He put down the tray and saw the birds perched close to the fire. "Time was that a man didn't have to deal with wild animals in the palace," he commented. "They aren't wild exactly," she protested, as he left the room, closing the door. The sparrows cheeped. Kel emptied a cup of the seed she had begged from the stables weeks before onto her desk. Dumping her collection of colored rocks from their shallow dish, she filled it with water and put it down for the birds. That all done, she hurried to wash and finish dressing. Looking at her face in the mirror, she saw what Gower had meant. The swelling was gone, but she had brightly colored bruises around one eye and her other eyebrow and on one cheekbone. Kel shook her head and left her room. Turning around after she locked up, she nearly tripped over Merrick. He shoved her. "I didn't ask you to come bullocking in," he yelled. "I don't need you to defend me." Kel held up her hands and stepped back. "I didn't do it for you," she told him. "Now they'll give me all kinds of grief saying I got a girl to—" "Huh?" Kel sighed. "I didn't do it for you, all right. I wanted to pick a fight with them, and you were there, that's all." The noise was drawing other pages out of their room. "Just leave me alone!" Merrick yelled, uncomfortably aware of their audience. He punched Kel in the right arm and then the left, as if daring her to hit him back. The blows hurt, but she let him have them. His pride was sore. She understood that. Her parents had explained it the first few times that someone she had tried to help got angry with her. She wished that Merrick had tried to hit his tormentors as well. He wouldn't be so angry if he'd gotten a punch or two of his own in last night. Just because you're a stupid probationer girl doesn't mean you can ignore custom like that either, Merrick informed her. Kel sighed. She'd been patient enough. She wanted her breakfast. Like I said, it had nothing to do with you. Tucking her hands into her belt, she marched down the hall. The other boys gathered around Merrick. She could hear them asking what had happened. She wondered what he would say. Not your problem, she told herself, and picked up her pace. She was hungry. Neil was not far behind her. Ungrateful little swine, he muttered as he sat across from Kel. She looked up from spooning honey onto her porridge. Never had breakfast looked so good. Healings always made her hungry. Me? No, Merrick. Kel looked down. Oh, you heard. My room isn't that far from yours. He doesn't have to be your slave the rest of his life, but a little thanks. And if it was you, Kel asked, buttering his scone. Neil blinked at her. Would you have thanked me? She bit into her scone. Well, Kel swallowed. It's bad enough that Joran and his pack shamed him. Me seeing it shamed him more. Me doing something about it. She dug into her porridge, letting Neil think it over. As she ate, she looked for Joran, Zahir, and Vincent. Their appearance was much more colorful than hers. Since they hadn't broken anything, they had not been sent to the healer. Not bad work for a first year, she thought, careful to keep her face straight. Neil was still thinking about what Kel had said when Salma found them. Lord Wilden sent me to remind you to wait on his table the next 3 nights. She informed Kel, I'll have a clean uniform ready after your classes. Make sure you reach the mess before he does. Kel nodded. Every other page had gone through the same routine. Salma touched her bruised eye. Nice sunrise, she commented, and smiled. Kel grinned back. That's another thing, grumbled Neil. You're happy about that fight. Kel buttered another scone. Yes. Great Griffins, why? Do you like getting hurt? She put her butter knife down. Don't you ever get tired of asking questions? Never. They're mother's milk to me. Answer, please. Kel toyed with her scone. She usually didn't like to explain herself, but she respected Neil. Warriors get hurt. You don't have to like it, just live with it. And last night I got tired of thinking and worrying myself sick. I knew it had to be done, and I did it. She sighed happily. I love when that happens. Before the pages left the mess hall, Lord Wilden made an announcement. As long as the snow continued to fall, Shang combat, weapons practice, and archery would be held at the indoor practice courts. Kel almost ran into Cleon as she headed out of the mess. He'd planted himself squarely in her path. She halted, staring at him with exasperation. Good morning, teardrop of my heart, he greeted her. Kel sighed, her shoulders drooping. He wasn't a bully like Joran. Last night had been about bullies, not about a silly custom. What is it this time? Cleon blinked. He'd expected a refusal. He recovered quickly. My quiver, if you would, my pearl. I took it to my room to sharpen the arrowheads last night, and of course I will require it. Return soon to my side, or I will pine. He'll pine, and I'm a holly bush, she thought with grim good humor, trotting back to the page's wing. At the end of archery practice, Lord Wilden told them that riding class was canceled. This is true only during storms, he explained as they put away their bows. If it's just a matter of snow on the ground, you train outdoor. Someone groaned. Wilden bore down on the groaner, the first-year page named Quindon. Do you think Spiderins sit indoors in the winter, he rapped out. They've got nice furry coats. They don't care if it's freezing. Killer centaurs and killer unicorns hate drifts, but they'll attack in shallow snow. Get used to fighting in it. He turned to include the rest of the pages in his lecture. Once a knight could take his ease in winter. Pirates, bandits, Scanrids, and Carthakis stayed home. We practiced our snow hunting skills, being polite to ladies and polishing our armor. Winter was our easy season. These immortals changed everything, he went on. Many are out and about in all but the worst weather, which means we come out soon. But most of them returned to the divine realm this summer, argued a third year. Didn't they? There are hundreds still in Tortle, Wilden said grimly, and hundreds more once they breed. Only the monsters that came after Midwinter Festival last year were returned to the divine realms. That leaves plenty for us to deal with one way or another. Any other questions? The pages shook their head. Today we commence with a knight's primary weapon. Walden informed them. Sergeant Ezekiel came forward, pushing a barrel set on a small wheeled cart. The barrel was stuffed with wooden practice swords. Take one. Treat it as your own from this moment. No one handed a practice sword to Cal. She was able to try several before choosing one. It felt easy in her grasp, almost feather light after her lance. The exercises were like that for the staff. The thing to remember was that the weapon was shorter. They were paired off as usual. Walden and Ezekiel took them through the basics: high blocks against high strikes, middle strikes against middle blocks, and low blocks against low strikes. Ezekiel then led the older boys in more complex exercises as Lord Walden stayed with the first years. To Cal's surprise, Neil practiced with the oldest pages. As a nobleman's son, he'd been tutored in the use of a sword for the last 7 years. Lord Walden took Neil's place in the first-year pairs, with Merrick as his partner. Cal practiced with Esmond, and she found that she enjoyed it. Sword work was completely new, so she never had to worry about confusing it with something that she had learned in the islands. Blocking and striking came easily, and when the bell rang for the end of practice, she was sorry to quit. So was Esmond, it seemed. He actually gave her a friendly clap on the shoulder before he put away his practice sword. After her last class, Cal trotted to her rooms, whistling cheerfully. She was tired and sore, as always, but for once she was ahead of the others. It looked as if she would be cleaned up and ready to wait on Lord Walden's table on time. Once dressing in a fresh tunic, she opened her door cautiously, checking overhead for buckets and the floor for anything smelly. Locking off, Cal set off briskly. 2 steps, and her feet skidded out from under her, and down she went on her back. When she managed to get to her feet, there was oil on her clothes and on her hair. The light cast by the torches in the hall had not shown her oil smeared on the gray flagstones. Back to her room she went to wash and change her clothes again. As she dressed, she heard the boys leaving for supper. Now she was going to be late. This time, when she left her room, she skirted the oil and trudged down the hall. Joran, Vincent, and Zahir waited for her near the mess hall. "I guess you'll learn not to tattle," sneered Vincent. "I didn't tattle," she said. "The servants told him." "Never mind that," Joran said, glaring at Vincent. "You've had it easy, wench. That's an end. You should have fled when you had the chance." Zahir opened a mess hall door. "You were going to be rid of me by now," she said, her voice ringing clear against the stone walls. Vincent started to turn back, and Joran grabbed his tunic and shoved him through the mess door. Zahir called over his shoulder, "You won't be here come spring, probationer." For her late arrival, Wyndon assigned Cal to wait on his table through the month of January. His guests that night, 2 grizzled warriors from the Northern Army, spent the meal telling jokes about women who were never prompt. Cal had to remind herself often to be as a stone. After that, she left her room to wait on Lord Walden by climbing through her shutters. She did it even when the drifts were high in the courtyard. Snow could always be brushed off. 6 days later, Midwinter Festival began, celebrating the rebirth of the sun and of the year after the longest night of the winter. There was no classroom work during the week-long holiday, so the pages could ready themselves to serve at the great banquet hall for dinner each night of the feast. Cal had dreaded her first experience of waiting on the great people of the realm, but to her relief, the first-year pages were spared the ordeal of service in the public eye. Instead, she spent the banquet hours at the head of the kitchen stairs. There, the first years passed the plates of food from the servants to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th-year pages, who actually waited on the diners. She decided that the worst part of her chore was constantly being under the eye of Master Oakbridge, the etiquette teacher. He missed nothing, either in the banquet hall or on the stairs. No one was allowed to relax for so much as a breath as long as the feasts were on. Cal would have loved the chance to look inside the hall at the nobles and all their finery. In the Yamani Islands, the holiday was spent in quiet, at home with family. The colorful celebrations of the eastern lands, with the great logs for the hearths and the fantastic structures of cakes and candy shaped like castles and immortals, the silk garlands, the performance of players, they were all just a dim memory for her. She would have liked to see more than the hot, sweaty kitchen folk and nervous, sweaty senior pages. It was also annoying to have to wait the long hours until the pages' supper. Only after the king and queen led their guests to a ballroom were the pages released from duty. The squires got to wait on the great ones while the pages ate silently and fell into bed. The morning after the longest night of the year, the 4th day of the 7th day celebration, was the time when the gifts were exchanged. They all took their packages to Sama so that when the servants came to lay the first fires of the year, they could also bring each page's gifts. Kel had thought long and hard about her gifts. Neil was easy. She gave him one of her lucky cats, since he never came into her room without looking at them. With your tongue, she wrote in her note to him, you need all the luck you can get. Gower received a silver noble for the work he did in her room. Money would not have been right for Sama. Instead, Kel gave her a silver hummingbird pin from her trinket box. The prince had been a source of worry. She thought it might be presumptuous to give him a present, but she really wanted to. She gave him a small Yumani painting of a bridge over a forest stream. The colors were dreamlike. Grays, faded blues and greens, stark browns. It always gave her a feeling of peace, and she hoped that it would make Roald feel better about his coming marriage. For Crown and the other sparrows, she had gotten raisins and dried cherries, a rare treat for the birds. They were pecking at the fruit when Gower knocked on Kel's door. In addition to her washwater, he carried a sack containing 3 gifts. One came from Neil, a leather-bound volume about female warriors who had once defended the realm of Tortle. To Kel's surprise, Prince Roald had given her a blown glass horse, no longer than her thumb. When she saw the flattened ears and the bared teeth, she laughed. It looked very much like Peach Blossom. There was no name on the 3rd gift. Kel undid the crimson silk wrap to find a stone jar as broad as her palm. It was made of green jasper, and the words bruise balm were carved into the stone stopper. Kel opened it and sniffed. The thick ointment inside had a delicate smell. Curious, she put a dab on a knuckle that she had bruised in yesterday's hand-to-hand combat. The moment the bruise balm touched it, the ache that had plagued her all night stopped. By the time that she had washed up and cleaned her teeth, the swelling had started to go down. Neil banged on her door as she finished dressing. Kel let him in, remembering to leave the door open. I love that little cat, he said, ruffling her hair. Thank you. Kel grinned. You're welcome, Neil. Who do you think sent this to me? She handed the jar to him. Neil opened it, sniffed, and frowned. He sniffed again and then waved a hand over the jar. Ouch, he cried, startled. Will label me very impressed and ship me to Carthag. Are you hurt? She asked. What if the ointment was some kind of nasty trick? What happened? Neil replaced the lid and offered the jar back to Kel. There's serious healing spells into this, he informed her. It's worth its weight in gold. But who? Kel asked. Who would give me such a thing? Don't look at me. Neil tore up a dried cherry that had caused some disagreements among the sparrows. I might have the skill to brew something like this in 10 years, but only then. Wasn't there a note? Kel shook her head. She rested a hand on her belt knife, wondering. She had never told Neil about the peerless blade with its plain sheath and hilt. Now she did, and showed him the knife. So maybe someone with money and a taste knows what a page needs and wants you to have it, he suggested as they went to breakfast. Too bad they couldn't arrange to have the stump done away with for you. I don't want him done away with, she told him as they walked into the mess hall. I just wanted him to take me off probation. Neil was about to reply, but changed his mind. It didn't matter that he hadn't spoken. You watch, Kel informed him stubbornly. I'll do so well, he'll have to let me stay another year. A wish for the new year, her friend had said, passing her a tray. So mote it be. So mote, whispered Kel, and followed him into the line for breakfast. With festival's end, winter settled in. The sparrows decided to make Kel's room their quarters. Each day they chirped with what she hoped were encouraging remarks, not bird jokes, as she did her pre-dawn exercises. They even ate from her hand, as well as from the shallow dishes that she found for them. Kel was grateful that none of the servants had complained about droppings. She would have hated to give up her feathered companions. The single-spot female, Crown, was particularly devoted over the gray days and cold nights, perching on Kel's shoulder whenever the girl was in her room. In late January, Kel was studying in the library when she noticed that Seaver had come and gone 3 different times in one evening. He would take a volume, return at a trot with it, and find another. The last time he was searching for the shelf, she closed her own book and followed him. He turned into Joran's room. You still haven't gotten it right, she heard Joran cry as Vincent giggled. Are you deaf? We need the third book on the Hunger Wars in Gala. You said it was the second volume on farming in Scanra. Cal had strained to hear Seaver. Of all the new boys, he was the quietest. Ow! Hit him again, Vincent, Jordan advised. Knock the wax from his ears. Cal opened the door in time to see Vincent cuff Seaver. Just when I finished most of my punishment work, too, she announced. It's the lump, Vincent told Joran, as if the blonde youth couldn't see that for himself. What will it take for you to get through your thick skull? Joran demanded, getting to his feet. Vincent stepped up to Kel's left side so the 2 third-years could come at her from either side. Perhaps we ought to break it this time. Where's Zahir? Did he lose the belly for your silly games? Kel asked. Seaver, please go. Seaver looked from Vincent to Joran. Stay if you want, Joran said, his eyes on Kel. We'll bash you too. Vincent kicked Seaver without warning. Kel lunged, grabbing Vincent by the tunic, and hurled him into Joran. Seaver ran out of the room as the older 2 pages scrambled to get Kel. The rest went as she expected. She lost, but struck a few good blows, that she might not have banished earlier in the year. They all told Wilden the traditional lie and took their punishment chores without complaint. At this rate, Kel thought, I won't have a free hour between now and the summer solstice. The next evening, Kel, the prince, and Neil decided to study in Neil's room. They had just opened their books when someone knocked on the open door. It was Seaver, his books under one arm. Behind him stood Merrick's sponsor, Fowron. I need help with mathematics, Seaver told Kel, his dark eyes meeting her squarely. Would you mind? Kel shook her head. You got space for me? Fowron wanted to know. I need to pick Neil's brain for this paper Sir Miles wants me to write. Besides, everyone knows it's warmer with more people in the room. They had excuses that first time, but apparently making up fresh one after that was too much work. Merrick came with them the next night and gave no explanation at all. The newcomers became regular additions to Neil's study group. If the boys noticed that Cal left the group once an evening and came back rosy-cheeked from a run through the halls, none of them commented. Longtime palace residents said it was the hardest winter in over a decade. Servants labored to clear paths between the outbuildings and the palace. Game grew scarce as the weeks remained cold and the snow piled high. In February, Lord Wilden and Sergeant Ezekiel led the pages on an overnight hike, teaching them how to dress and camp in heavy snow. Joran picked up the tracks of a lone deer that led them to a small herd. When they took the meat to a village that had been cut off from supplies, they were welcomed gratefully. The pages swarmed up now with staffs and then moved to sword practice. Only 1 day a week was spent on more complex staff work. After 3 weeks, Kel told Neil that she was so out of practice with polearms that the most timid of the Emperor's ladies would be able to gut her with a glaive and the flash. Neil found this infinitely amusing and told Kel that he admired her sense of humor. Kel blinked at him. I'm serious, Neil. He patted her shoulder. Of course you are. One day you and I will visit the islands, she informed her, and then you will know better. Reviewing her schedule, Kel decided that she could fit in a pattern dance before supper and another before she went to bed. Pattern dances were linked techniques to give the dancer practice in combat moves when no opponents were about. That night she forced herself to do a complex dance just before supper. She did a simpler one before she went to sleep. The exercises became a permanent addition to her routine. The work she put into pattern dances and exercises for her arms was beginning to show in practice. As her sword skills improved, Lord Wilden and Sergeant Ezekiel began to pair her with older pages. No one objected until one afternoon in late February, when Lord Wilden was called away from the court. When he left, the older pages moved around, and Kel found herself facing Zahir. Uh-oh, she thought, as the vizier's dark eyes blazed. I'm in trouble now. They began with the strike and block combinations. Ezekiel stood over them as they moved on to combinations like 3 high cuts, 2 low, with blocks to match. He watched Kel and Zahir through 2 complete sets and part of a third, and then walked down a line to see how Quindon did against Fowron. The moment the sergeant's eyes were elsewhere, Zahir hissed, It's time for you to take your place behind the veil where you belong. He broke the drill, banging Kel's legs hard as he swung his wooden practice sword from left to right. She backed up and he followed. When he struck overhand, she knocked his sword aside and struck him in the ribs. "We don't wear veils," she whispered in reply. Zahir growled. "A woman out of her place is a distraction to men," and struck her repeatedly until Kel kicked him in the stomach to make him back off. Joran, Vincent, and a few other boys closed around them to cut them off from the sergeant's view. Neil saw them bunch up and came to Kel's defense, dragging Zahir's friend out of his way. When Vincent hit Neil from behind, the prince yanked Vincent off him. Merrick threw himself onto Joran's back. Faleron and Seaver went for Zahir. The battle ended only when Sergeant Ezekiel waded in and pulled everyone apart. Lord Wilden was livid. He sentenced all of them to a week of early evening duty in the palace laundry. The laundry maids, a set of rough, no-nonsense women with muscles that Kel envied, had a field day with the lads assigned to help them. "It's not fair," Merrick grumbled as he wrung out sheets. "Zahir started it." "But you lot didn't have to pinch in," Kel reminded him. "Besides, this may be the only time all winter that we get the mud out from under our nails." Merrick glowered at her, and Kel waited for the explosion. Instead, he shook his head, smiling wryly. "Don't you get mad about anything?" he demanded, in amused exasperation. "You know they call you the lump." "I try not to show anger," Kel explained to him. "The Yamanis won't talk to you if you let your feelings out. To them, it's like picking your nose at the table. Besides, haven't you noticed how tiring it is losing your temper?" "I've noticed it gets you punishments," the red-headed boy replied with a shrug. "Maybe it's the same thing." "Well, you're tired at the end of both, so there you are," Kel said practically. "Help me wring out this blanket." That's the end of our chapter for today. We'll pick up tomorrow with Chapter 9, Tests. We've been reading Protector of the Small, First Test by Tamora Pierce, published by Random House. My name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.